Jam Vishnupad Paramahansa Paribrajacharya Astotra Satyasi Simad, His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai, Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai, Namacharya Haridas Thakur Ki Jai, Prem Se Kaho Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Sri Vasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai, Sri Sri Radha Krishna Gop Gopinath Shyamakunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhan Ki Jai, Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai, Navadvip Dham Ki Jai, Bhakti Devi Ki Jai, Tulsi Maharani Ki Jai, Yamuna Devi Ki Jai, Ganga Devi Ki Jai, Samaveta Bhakta Vrindi Ki Jai, Gaur Premanande. All glories to the new Dwarka devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Guru and Gauranga. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Preshtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swamin Iti Namane Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarane. Om Nama Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namah Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namah Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Srimad Bhagavatam, the Bhagavat Purana, Canto 2, the Cosmic Manifestation, Chapter 10, Bhagavatam is the answer to all questions. We are covering several verses today, and we'll begin the verse that we'll chant is verse number 1. Shri Shuka Uvacha Atra Sargo Visargascha Sthanam Poshanam Uttaya Manvantareshanukata Nirodho Muktir Ashraya. Shri Shuka Uvacha Atra Sargo Visargascha Sthanam Poshanam Uttaya Manvantareshanukata Nirodho Muktir Ashraya. Shri Shuka Uvacha Atra Sargo Visargascha Sthanam Poshanam Uttaya Manvantareshanukata Nirodho Mukta Ashraya. Shri Shuka Uvacha Atra Sargo Visargascha Sthanam Poshanam Uttaya Manvantareshanukata Nirodho Muktir Ashraya. Please chant. Ladies, anyone else? Shri Shuka Uvacha. Sri Shukadeva Goswami said, Atra, in this Srimad Bhagavatam, Sarga, statement of the creation of the universe. Visarga, statement of subcreation. Cha, also, Sthanam, the planetary systems. Poshanam, protection. Uttayaha, the creative impetus. Manvantara, changes of manus. Isha Anukata, the science of God. Nirodha, going back home, back to Godhead. Mukti, liberation. Ashraya, the samam bonum. Please repeat. Sri Shukadeva Goswami said, in the Srimad Bhagavatam, there are 10 divisions of statements regarding the following: the creation of the universe, subcreation, planetary systems, protection by the Lord, the creative impetus, the change of manus, the science of God, returning home back to Godhead, liberation, and the samam bonum. All right, we got 2 more verses before we see a purport by Srila Prabhupada. Dashamasya vishuddhi artam navanam iha lakshanam varnayanti mahatmanaha srutenartena chanjasa. To isolate the transcendence of the samam bonum, the symptoms of the rest are described, sometimes by Vedic inference, sometimes by direct explanation, and sometimes by summary explanations given by the great sages. Text number 3. Bhuta matrendriya diyam janma sarga udarataha brahmano guna vaisham yad visarga paurusha smritaha. The elementary creation of 16 items of matter, namely the 5 elements, fire, water, land, air, and sky, sound, form, taste, smell, touch, and the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, skin, and mind, is known as sarga, whereas subsequent resultant interaction of the modes of material nature is called visarga. Purport by the ISKCON founder Acharya A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. In order to explain the 10 divisional symptoms of the Srimad Bhagavatam, there are 7 continuous verses. The first of these, under reference, pertains to the 16 elementary manifestations of earth, water, etc., with material ego composed of material intelligence and mind. The subsequent creation is a result of the reactions of the above-mentioned 16 energies of the first Purusha, the Mahavishnu incarnation of Govinda, as later explained by Lord Brahma in his treatise Brahma Samhita as follows. Yakara narna vajale bhajati sma yoga nidram ananda jagaranda saroma kupa adhara murtim avalamya param swamurtim govindamadi purushang tamahang bhajami. The first Purusha incarnation of Govinda, Lord Krishna, known as the Mahavishnu, goes into a yoga nidra, mystic sleep, and the innumerable universes are situated in potency in each and every hair hole of his transcendental body. As mentioned in the previous verse, Srutena, or with reference to the Vedic conclusions, the creation is made possible from the Supreme Personality of Godhead directly by manifestations of his particular energies. Without such a Vedic reference, the creation appears to be a product of material nature. This conclusion comes from a poor fund of knowledge. From Vedic reference, it is concluded that the origin of all energies, namely internal, external, and marginal, is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And, as explained herein before, the illusory conclusion is that the creation is made by the inert material nature. The Vedic conclusion is transcendental light, whereas the non-Vedic conclusion is material darkness. The internal potency of the Supreme Lord is identical with the Supreme Lord, and the external potency is enlivened in contact with the internal potency. The parts and parcels of the internal potency, which react in contact with the external potency, are called the marginal potency or the living entities. Thus, the original creation is directly from the Supreme Personality of Godhead, or Parang Brahman, and the secondary creation, as a reactionary result of the original ingredients, is made by Brahma. Thus, the activities of the whole universe are started. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Unmilitang Yena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha Trinadapi Sunichena Tarot Eva Sahishnuna Amanina Manadena Kirtaniya Sadahari Hare Nama Hare Nama Hare Namaiva Kivalam Kalo Nastyeva 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 Gatiranyata Vanchakalpa Turubhyascha Kripa Sindubhyaeva Cha Patitanang Pavanebhyo Nudwarka devotees Namo Namaha. So, this section that we just studied today, especially the first two verses, are also described in the Adi Leela of the Chaitanya Charitamrita. And in that, Prabhupada gives slightly different synonyms and, of course, a different purport. So, how can I not read that to you? Because we sing every morning, Guru Mukha Padma Vakya Chitte Te Kariya Aikya Arna Koriho Mane Ash. We only want to hear the words emanating from the lotus mouth of our spiritual master. We don't want anything else. So, here is how Prabhupada, in the synonyms, slightly different. So, for Sarga, the creation of the ingredients of the universe; Visarga, the creations of Brahma; Stanam, the maintenance of the creation; Poshanam, the favoring of the Lord's devotees; Utaya, impetuses for activity; Manu Antara, prescribed duties given by the Manus; Isha Anukata, a description of the incarnations of the Lord; Nirodha, the winding up of creation. So here he's giving a different angle of vision on the word Nirodha that he gave in the Bhagavatam. Mukti, liberation. Ashray, the ultimate shelter, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Now in the purport, we get a different angle of vision. These verses from Srimad Bhagavatam, 2nd Canto, Chapter 10, verse 1 and 2, list the 10 subject matters dealt with in the text of the Bhagavatam. Of these, the 10th is the substance, and the other 9 are categories derived from the substance. These 10 subjects are listed as follows. So now Prabhupada gives more detailed information on these 10 subjects. Number 1, Sarga, the first creation by Vishnu, the bringing forth of the 5 gross material elements, the 5 objects of sense perception, the 10 senses, the mind, the intelligence, the false ego, and the material and the total material energy or universal form. Number 2, Visarga, the secondary creation or the work of Brahma in producing the moving and unmoving bodies in the universe, Brahmanda. 3, Sthana, the maintenance of the universe by the personality of Godhead, Vishnu. Vishnu's function is more important and his glory greater than Brahma's and Lord Shiva's. For although Brahma is the creator and Lord Shiva the destroyer, Vishnu is the maintainer. Number 4, Poshana, special care and protection for devotees by the Lord. As a king maintains his kingdom and subjects, but nevertheless gives special attention to the members of his family, so the personality of Godhead gives special care to his devotees, who are all souls completely surrendered to him. Utti, the urge for creation or initiative power, that is the cause of all inventions, according to the necessities of time, space, and objects. Manvantara, the periods controlled by the Manus, who teach regulative principles for living beings who desire to achieve perfection in human life. The rules of Manu, as described in the Manu Samhita, guide the way to such perfection. Ishanukata, scriptural information regarding the personality of Godhead, his incarnations on earth, and the activities of his devotees. Scriptures dealing with these subjects are essential for progressive human life. Nirodha, the winding up of all energies employed in creation. Such potencies are emanations from the personality of Godhead, who eternally lies in the Karana ocean. The cosmic creations manifested with his breath are again dissolved in due course. Mukti, liberation of the conditioned souls encaged by the gross and subtle coverings of body and mind. And when freed from all material affection, the soul, giving up the gross and subtle material bodies, can attain the spiritual sky in his original spiritual body. I always like to emphasize that phrase, original spiritual body, and engage in transcendental loving service to the Lord in Vaikuntha Loka or Krishna Loka. When the soul is situated in his original constitutional position of existence, he is said to be liberated. It is possible to engage in transcendental loving service of the Lord and become Jivan Mukta, a liberated soul, even while in the material body. And for us, Srila Prabhupada is the perfect example of a Jivan Mukta. Otherwise, why would we follow him? Number 10, Ashray, the transcendence, the Samam Bonam, from whom everything emanates, upon whom everything rests, and in whom everything merges after annihilation. That is a definition of the absolute truth. He is the source and support of all. The Ashray is also called the Supreme Brahman, as in the Vedanta Sutra, Atato Brahma Jigyasa Janmadyasya Yata. Srimad Bhagavatam especially describes this Supreme Brahman as the Ashray. Sri Krishna is this Ashray, and therefore the greatest necessity of life is to study the science of Krishna. Srimad Bhagavatam accepts Sri Krishna as the shelter of all manifestations, because Lord Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is the ultimate source of everything, the supreme goal of all. Two different principles are to be considered herein, namely, Ashray, the object providing shelter, and Asrita, the dependence requiring shelter. The Ashrita exist under the original principle, the Ashray. The first 9 categories described in the first 9 cantos of Srimad Bhagavatam, from creation to liberation, including the Purusha avatars, the incarnations, the marginal energy or living entities, and the external energy or material world, are all asrita. The prayers of Srimad Bhagavatam, however, aim for the Ashray Tattva, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna. The great souls expert in describing Srimad Bhagavatam have very diligently delineated the other 9 categories, sometimes by direct narrations and sometimes by indirect narrations, such as stories. The real purpose of doing this is to know perfectly the absolute transcendence, Sri Krishna, for the entire creation, both material and spiritual, rests on the body of Sri Krishna. So I'd like to key in on some of these 10 subject matters. The one that interests me the most is Isha Anukata. In the Chaitanya Charitamrita, he just said it was a description of the incarnations of the Lord. Whereas in today's Bhagavatam class, he said it was the science of God. And I very much love this phrase, science of God. Because this dispels any, shall we say, refutation or trying to belittle what we do, thinking that it's all hocus pocus, hodgepodge, pie in the sky, like John Lennon sang in one of his stupid songs. Hare Krishna is pie in the sky. Means he didn't get it. He didn't understand. No, we are studying the science of God. That example I've given many times. Many, many years ago, preaching in Mrs. Wilson's class in South, what is that? Cal State, LA. So I was speaking to this class of students. I don't know, she had several classes, emotions and religion. And so she had respect for our movement. So I was explaining that what we practice is science. And then one lady raised her hand and said, "How can you call it science? Science means biology, chemistry. I said, no. Science means there is a procedure, and you follow the procedure, you get a predictable result. H2O, which, by the way, we really need right now. H2O. We're drying up. We need to do more chanting for the rest of the state. Seems we're not doing enough because we're running out. The tap is soon going to be Hare Krishna. So if you know the process, H2O, then you get water. So I said this is the same thing, whether it be Bhagavad Gita or Srimad Bhagavatam. We are learning and hearing so many different items. Once you put them into practice, you get a predictable result. If you ask Lord Chaitanya, what is that predictable result? He will say, love of God. Because Lord Chaitanya taught that the Vedas are only teaching 3 things. There are 108 Upanishads, the 4 Vedas, the 18 Puranas, the Itihasas, Mahabharata, Ramayana. But Lord Chaitanya says, it's only teaching 3 things. Sambandha, Abhideya, Prayojana. Bas, finish. That's it. We're learning verse after verse what is our constitutional position with Krishna. That constitutional position is always there. Because we learned in 2nd chapter of Bhagavad Gita, never was there a time when I did not exist, nor you, nor all these kings. Neither in the future shall any of us cease to be. Not you, not them, not me. Once you understand or accept that I always existed, then it is not difficult to understand that we have always have an eternal relationship of service to Krishna. That is why we exist. We exist to render a loving exchange with Krishna. That is why we can preach to anyone, Christian, Muslim, Jew, atheist, whatever. Please, don't think in terms of your narrow-minded designation. Rather, think in terms of you are part and parcel of God. And that the whole purpose of your existence is to render loving exchanges. It begins with service. And Lord Chaitanya teaches, how do we begin that service? Sevan muke hi jivadao swayam eva spurati adha. The service begins with the tongue. I know my service began with the tongue when I got spinach Mahaprasadam in the basement of Brooklyn Temple, and it was on a piece of wax paper the size of a palm, and I slurped it, and I jumped up. Give me more! Give me more! This is great! And the devotee said, gotta come back tomorrow. I said to myself, I can't get this food anywhere in New York. I had been to so many restaurants in New York. I was spending a lot of time pursuing my musical dream. But when I tasted that spinach Mahaprasadam, oh my God, what an experience. What an experience. And look where it has brought me. Here I am, sitting in the greatest temple, New Dwarka, sitting amongst the nicest devotees of New Dwarka. And I get to speak about God. When I was 8 or 9 years old, I remember my father, he was a mechanic for Consolidated Edison in New York. And he used to work the night shift. But my father was, you could say, a workaholic. So besides, and I guess he didn't like to stay home, he also had a side hustle. He had a nursery, Blossoms of Spring. And he'd have to drive 20 miles to go to his Ponderosa, his Blossoms of Spring. So I had to go so many times, pull the weeds from the root. And later, when I heard about the weeds of bad things in the heart, it clicked. That's why my father kept saying, pull the weeds by the root. Because that's what we're doing when we chant the Maha Mantra. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama. We're pulling the weeds out by the root. Or a boil. When you have a boil, you have to squeeze, draw it out with hot, and then squeeze. Oh, it's so painful. Oh. Anybody have a boil? Have you ever had that? Right? Am I right? You've had it? It's painful, right? Yes. And then remember the devotee said, and he had to squeeze. Ah! Hare Krishna. So you have to get everything out by the root. Otherwise, the poison stays in the blood and you could die. It's serious stuff. So I was driving in the car with my father. And I told my father, you know why? I don't know. I told my father, someday I'm going to write a song about God. And here it is. So many years later, it has come true. So be careful what you desire, because eventually Krishna will give you what you want. So we are learning the science of God. And if you did not have some realization, you wouldn't continue. You are all, after all, the Bhagavatam, the Bhagavatam says that Sumedasa, one who takes to chanting is Sumedasa. Not just intelligent, very intelligent, genius. So, you're all chanting, so you're intelligent persons. You're not going to do something every day, hour and a half, 2 hours, in my case, 3 hours, to chant something over and over again and not get some result. I don't know about, I wouldn't. If I didn't get some realization from chanting, I wouldn't have lasted 2 weeks in Brooklyn Temple. That was my original proposal. I'll give it 2 weeks. But 2 weeks turned into 2 months. 2 months turns into 2 years. And now, 73, in 2 more years, it'll be 50 years. The time just like that. And I'm thinking, I still have not perfected the chanting of the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. So that means I have to work harder. I have to chant with more attention. I remember one ISKCON guru sannyasi many, many years ago. He was staying for some time in my office there that I had. And he told me that the root of all offenses is inattentive chanting. And I never forgot that. And when you think about it, it's very hard to stay focused and to stay attentive to each and every syllable. It's hard work. 6th chapter of Bhagavad Gita says, for the neophyte, work is said to be the means. Sadhana bhakti means work. It's hard work. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare. And to stay focused and fixed, you have to work on it. And of course, you fail, you pick yourself up and get back in the race. That's what chanting is all about. Every day is a new day. You wake up, right? Some of us now are in our 70s. I see this little boy, so much energy. I go, how come I don't got that energy? Hard work. I'm sure Brigupati, Sachitanoy, going out on Sankit, that's also hard work. Remember, I'm sure you remember those days when you used to have the boxes or the big book bags, right? You used to have the big book bag and you had to sling that around, right? It took a toll. Hard work executing the order. I remember that stupid boss I had when I had a job in Westwood. He was saying once he found out when I came out of the closet and everybody in the office knew that I was a Hare Krishna. So he said, you guys, you just mumble all day and you just space out and you're not. I said, you have no idea. I told him right on his face. I said, you wouldn't last one day in the Hare Krishna temple. He thinks we just space out all day. Or Ratnabhushana has that experience of somebody telling him, hey, all you guys do all day is pray. Why don't you do some work? They'd have no idea. Walk a mile in a devotee's shoes. Then come back to me and tell me. I don't know how true it is, but back in the late 70s, early 80s, there was this story going around that two, either CIA or FBI, it was here? Was it CIA or FBI? Anyway, two CIA FBI guys tried to infiltrate and be devotees. I think after 2 weeks they said, we can't do this. Yeah, you can't do it. Why? Because you're not surrendered. You have to surrender to the spiritual master. Everything is so contingent. And there's that one reference. I can't remember exactly how it's worded, but basically Prabhupada wrote in one place that you can know something of your relationship with Krishna by understanding your relationship with your spiritual master. Something like that. Maybe somebody knows the exact quote. But it emphasizes the point. First thing in the morning, Vande Guru Sri Charanara Vindam. All right, after Vande Guru Sri, then we worship a plant. Far out, man. Far. I always thought Tulsi worship was far out. In Brooklyn Temple, after the Sunday feast, when everybody ate 8 plates of prasadam stacked high like this, there would be a rip-roaring Tulsi kirtan in the temple. You remember that, Archita Brigupati? You remember that in Brooklyn Temple? Big Tulsi kirtan after prasadam. I always thought, wow, this is so far out. I love this Hare Krishna life. It's lots of excitement. Never a dull moment in a Hare Krishna temple. Always something going on. So I've said enough. We have maybe a couple of minutes. We could have a discussion. We'll let our temple president make comments as he sees.
Nirantara Prabhu, thank you for a wonderful class. I don't know, when I was looking through the purports here, and I think what I gleaned out of it was that you were talking about that Krishna consciousness is very scientific, a scientific process, and I also feel I like that particular idea. It's very scientific, and from that, I think we learn from the spiritual master that our senses originally have been given to us to serve Krishna. That's originally why we got these senses. And the unfortunate part is that we become captivated by the material energy. And reading this particular purport, I just kind of gleaned that for us to get relieved of this attachment is to hear about Krishna, just like you were speaking so many wonderful things about the qualities of Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So really, we've gotten captivated by sense enjoyment, and the only way to get out, and the whole process of what we're doing in Krishna consciousness is to actually rectify this condition of life by hearing about Krishna. And just hearing, it rectifies all those problems. And when you hear properly, it is a scientific process because you learn the process by hearing, and from hearing you act accordingly. And just like a scientist in the lab, they hear properly from their teacher, they perform the chemical, organization of it and create something. So for us, it's extremely important to understand why we're in this material world and scientifically engage ourselves in serving Krishna and utilizing our senses to serve Krishna, and we'll become happy and purified.
Jai. Yes, beware of Maya. She's always there. What else? Anything else? Then let us continue our service to Guru and Gauranga. Hare Krishna. I have it in the car. I'll bring it to your room.
Yeah, I just wanted to save you the effort if you had it.
No.